19 tonight. All of you should have a handout. Looks something like this. If you do not have a handout, raise your hand real high, and David will come find you, and he'll bring you a handout. So if you don't have a handout, raise your hand real high. David will find you. He'll get you one. We're in Judges 19. We're going to be in verses 1 through 21 today. So we're going to go about halfway through this chapter. We finished, last week we had Dr. Jeremy Maurer share with us. Wasn't it such a great message from him about God's creation, how it points to God? Would you give Jeremy just another thanks for his hard work? Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy, do you like it on that side of the pulpit or on this side of the pulpit? He likes it as far away from this side of the pulpit as he can, he said. You did a great job. Thank you, Jeremy. 2 weeks ago, we finished chapter 18. Chapter 18 was the conclusion of the first conclusion of Judges as a book. So Judges, the way that it's written, it has 2 introductions. If you've been with us all the way through, you remember there were 2 stories that led into the book of Judges. Now there are 2 conclusions. So the author here shared one story to illustrate the depravity, the spiritual depravity of the nation of Israel. We concluded that story 2 weeks ago, and now we're getting into chapter 19, and we're going to begin the second conclusion story. It's the beginning of the second story that the author is using to illustrate how far Israel has drifted from the Lord. That is the whole point. The first verse in this passage, you're going to see a familiar phrase. It says, in those days there was no king in Israel. So the author is emphasizing that the story he's about to share is a direct result of there being no true leadership in the nation of Israel. They have drifted away from the Lord. No one is leading them closer to the Lord. And as a result, they are growing more and more depraved. The first conclusion, the first story, was used to show the spiritual rebellion of Israel, just how far they drifted spiritually. It focused on a Levite. This is a man who was born of the tribe of Levi. They were set aside as priests of Israel, and this was a man who was supposed to lead Israel in worship of Yahweh, and instead he was led astray by a man named Micah and then by the tribe of Dan, and he was led into idolatry, and then he in turn led the tribe of Dan in idolatry. So this full tribe he led in idolatry led him further and further away from God instead of closer and closer to God. So it was a story used to show how far spiritually Israel had drifted from God. This story centers on how far Israel has drifted away from the Lord socially, the social ramifications of drifting away from the Lord. Title tonight is The Results of Rebellion. Now, you guys probably are all old enough, you've been around the block long enough to know that when you rebel against authority or rebel against the Lord, you rebel against righteousness, whatever it may be, there are ramifications, there are results that you will see in your life that come from rebellion. We're going to look at some of the results that Israel was seeing. And as we read through this passage together, I really want to challenge you, as I was challenged, I want to extend this challenge to you. As we read through Israel, Israel's account, I think you're going to see some similarities between where the nation of Israel is at this point and where we are as an American nation at this point in our history. As I was reading through some of these things, I couldn't help but think about where we are as a nation. And I don't want to center the whole time tonight on that, but I can't escape the fact that as we as a people group, we as a nation are drifting away from the Lord for a multitude of reasons, that we are seeing some of the exact same results that Israel was seeing at this time because of their rebellion against the Lord. And what we see in nations, we see in families. What we see in families, we also see in individuals' lives. And so there might be a multitude of ways you can look at this, but here's where Israel is. I want to walk through this long passage with you here tonight. I'm going to start in verse 1, chapter 19, verse 1. And it says, in those days when there was no king in Israel. Again, this whole story is coming from that one fact: there's no one leading Israel. A certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him. She went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there for 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. Now, I want to pause there for just a moment. I want to explain just a couple things. I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I want us all to be on the same page. So here we have another Levite, another man called to lead Israel spiritually as a priest. He's sojourning to the remote parts of the country of Ephraim. And it says he took for himself a concubine. If you're not sure what a concubine is, at this time, they had almost like a caste system. It was a tiered system, specifically in this regard to women and how they functioned within the home. And so a man could have a wife, like a typical wife like we have today, husbands and wives. But then he could also take, after he had a wife, he could also take more women to be a part of his harem, if you will. And they would be lesser than his wife, and they would be called concubines. So concubines are betrothed to the husband, but they are lesser than a wife. They don't get the full blessings. They don't get the full care. They don't get the full resources of the wife. They are lesser, but they are tied to that one man. And you might be thinking, well, that's rather unfair. It was. It's not a good system, and the Bible nowhere from Genesis to Revelation says that this is a good system. This is merely a cultural thing in that day and age, and it was polygamy, and it was sinful, just as it would be sinful today. But this is what a concubine was. So similar to a wife, but lesser than a wife. Okay? So that's what a concubine would be. And a husband could have many, many concubines. King Solomon had 1,000. So he was a busy guy. Verse 2 says the concubine was unfaithful to him. Now, you could read different translations. They're going to say different things. Just real quick, this within the context of what the passage is saying, where it says she was unfaithful to him, it actually does not really point to her cheating on him. A lot of scholars and commentators have different opinions as to what the original language says here. It almost makes it seem like she just really despised him. Another way that some people translate this is to say that she found him repulsive, that she despised him, that she was unfaithful to him in her heart. She hardened her heart to him, and she fled from him. And so whether she was unfaithful in her marriage physically with another man, or whether she was unfaithful by really despising her husband and fleeing from her husband and going back home, we're not quite clear on the language there, but the ESV translates it as unfaithful to him. And it says that her husband arose and went after her to go win her back, but it took him 4 months. Maybe that points as to why she found him repulsive. He didn't much care for her, it doesn't seem like to me, if it took him 4 months to go after his lady. So she's at her father's house. 4 months go by, and her husband finally comes to win her heart back. Verse 4. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to get. He's going with a servant and a couple of donkeys. I'm in the middle of verse 3. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And the father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning. He prepared to go, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you can go." So the two of them sat, and they ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And the man arose up to go. His father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day, he arose early in the morning to depart. The girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines," so that they ate So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, Behold, now the day is waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to a close. Lodge here now, or lodge here, and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall arise early in the morning for your journey and go home. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up, departed, and arrived opposite of Jabes, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. And when they were near Jabes, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, Come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. And his master said to him, We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners. Who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah. And he said to his young man, Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. So they passed on and went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in and spend the night in Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Now, if you have your Bibles, you should circle that or highlight that or something. If you're on the handout, keep your finger on verse 15. That's rather important. No one took them into their home to spend the night. Verse 16, And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim. He was sojourning in Gibeah. And the men of the place were Benjaminites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. The old man said, Where are you going, and where do you come from? And he said to him, We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. And the old man said, Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square. So he brought him into his house, gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet, ate, and drank. We're going to stop there for tonight. I know it's lots of verses. We are stopping short of a really strange part of this story. If you've not read Judges chapter 19, you need to continue on this week. We're going to come back together next Wednesday. We're going to finish this story, a tragic, strange, sad story. We're going to stop here for a moment because already in this passage, we've seen four results, four hallmarks of four things that happen when a group of people turn away from the Lord. These things happen every time. You will see the same sort of situation, the same things begin to be affected when a group of people, whether it be an organization, whether it be a church, whether it be a nation, whether it be a family, when they drift away from God, you will see these four things. There is a decline of leadership, there's a decline in marriage, there's a decline in parenting, and there's a decline in community. You see all four represented here, and you will see all four throughout history when you look at groups of people who drift away from God. I first want to just move through briefly the decline of leadership. This man is a Levite. This is your first indication that he is a spiritual leader for the nation of Israel. Levites are called to lead in the temple. They take turns. They have assignments. They are given special allotments and privileges in the nation of Israel. They are the spiritual leaders by birthright of the nation of Israel. And here we have a Levite who has got many red flags that if you are looking to this man for spiritual leadership, there are many things that should cause you to pause before you receive this man as a spiritual leader or any form of leader in your life. It should have caused pause to the people in his life here in his time. So as a Levite, he was set apart as a spiritual leader, but he was not following the law. He was not living as an example to the people around him. And I just want to point out three things that I noticed in this man's life that are of concern. Number one is that he's wandering around in the hill country rather than serving in his assignment in the temple of the Levitical city that he was assigned to. As a Levite, they are given land. They are given a place to live and to serve. Special allotments. And here it describes this Levite, and I find it really interesting that as the Israelites drift away from the Lord, their spiritual leaders, their priests, are given as the two examples in the concluding stories. Both of them are Levites, if you noticed that, and both of them are sojourning. Both of them are wandering around in the wilderness looking for a place for them to set up shop, rather than fulfilling their assignment that would have come to them through their birthright. So here he is, wandering around in the hill country in Ephraim. That's a red flag. Why is this man not serving in the temple? Red flag number two is that he takes a concubine. And again, if you just read through this story real quickly, you might miss a couple of these things. But the fact that a Levite, a spiritual leader, is taking for himself a concubine is of great concern. It would have been of great concern for the Israelites, and it should be for us today. It's like somebody coming up to preach, or you guys looking to bring in a pastor here at the church, and they have two wives. Do you see a problem there? You should. That's an issue. This sexual immorality that's taking root in Israel is so bad that the spiritual leaders are even throwing caution to the wind. They're not even trying to live righteously as far as their sexual inclinations, as far as protecting marriage. The spiritual leaders themselves are embodying all of the terrible issues that the nation of Israel are now suffering from. He takes for himself a concubine rather than staying within the confines of a healthy marriage. Number three, we see that this man shows a great inconsistency in his convictions. And I just want to call your attention here to how he responds to his servant when the servant says, hey, we should turn here to Jabes. Why don't we turn here and camp for the night? The sun is setting. It's getting late. The servant is concerned about being out after dark. It's dangerous. It's not safe. What was the Levite's response when the servant said, let's go into this city? What did he say? Don't do it. Why? Because they're foreigners. Those aren't Israelites. Those are not the people of the nation of Israel. Now, isn't it amazing how this man, who's openly practicing sexual immorality, who's openly not fulfilling his responsibility as a priest in Levi or in Israel, who's openly defying the law, all of a sudden his servant says, hey, here's a city we really ought to, for our own safety, we ought to go here and camp for the night. All of a sudden he says, absolutely not. I can't be around foreigners. Isn't it interesting that all of a sudden he's a man of great conviction? The strange thing for us in our human nature is that as we as individuals drift away from the Lord, as a group of people, whether it be a church, whether it be an organization, whether it be a nation, an entire people group, when they drift away from the Lord, it's really interesting to watch the few areas of conviction that they maintain. That they give up all of this spiritual righteous ground and they stand firm in these seemingly fringe, strange areas. And to me, I see this Levite and I just say to myself, man, you don't care about anything else. Why do you care about staying in a town with some foreigners in it? Right? And so you see great inconsistency. And I've been in situations where I just scratch my head. I remember one time in Union when I was pastoring there, this little church in Union, Missouri, I had a woman who was just so concerned about something. And she came and met with me, and I'm sitting across my desk from her and says, Pastor, I just can't come to I don't know if you've noticed, but I sit outside during the worship service. I come in for your sermon, but I sit outside during worship. And I was like, I have noticed that. It's a little strange. What's going on there? She said, I just can't be in the room when so-and-so's on stage. You can't. Why not? Well, I believe that this and this is happening in their life. Okay. So she's making an accusation about this other person. And she's like, I can't believe you haven't done anything about it yet. So, well, one, nobody's ever said this to me before. I didn't know. Two, I'm not going to go to somebody with hearsay and accuse them of things. I'm willing to talk to this person if you're in the room with me. And of course, she's like, no, I can't do that, right? I'll just sit outside in the foyer. And as I'm having this conversation with her, the thing that she was upset about seemed to me to be rather minor. And as I was talking to her, I pressed her on a few things. Because she and I had worked through some situations where she had committed adultery in her marriage. She was actively working through significant sin issues and was barely a part of the church and kind of in and out. And I pressed her. Said, it's very strange to me that while I've been trying to work with you in these areas, you defend this, but you won't even be in the same room with this person who's doing something as minor as what you brought to me. But she had conviction when it was in regard to that other woman, but had no conviction when she had the issues in her own life. And my friends, we need to be careful because we're all guilty of that. It's where Jesus says, why do you focus on the speck in their eye when you ignore the log in your own? It's exactly what this Levite is doing. And when your leaders are openly practicing in that regard, my friends, it's a red flag. It's a decline of leadership. It's a decline of marriage. The Levite's marriage to the concubine is a sign of how far Israel has fallen at this point. And as a nation, they've drifted further from God, and marriage was pushed further outside of what God ordained it to be. And simply put, when the institution of marriage is healthy, the nation will be healthy. When a nation protects and stands firm on the institution of marriage, that nation will be healthier and healthier. You see it in Israel. You can see it in America. Look at how far, this is where I begin to see so many parallels. As America continues to struggle in so many ways, look at how it has torn down and redefined marriage. Look at what it is doing to the institution of marriage. Israel did the exact same thing. I mean, well, not the exact same thing as what we're doing right now, but they struggled in so many similar ways. Here, a spiritual leader is practicing openly polygamy, many wives, taking on a concubine. And marriage is so important here. As you look at the health of marriages in a country, as you look at the health of marriages in the church, as you look at the health of marriages in a town, in an organization, whatever it might be, you can quickly determine how healthy that organization or that nation or that church is by how healthy their marriages are, by how strongly they protect marriage. In nature, scientists who study nature, when they're trying to determine how healthy an ecosystem is or how polluted an ecosystem is, they'll look for indicator species. And one of the primary indicator species in any ecosystem are the amphibians because of how they live. And so frogs are a primary indicator species. And so when a scientist is going into an ecosystem to determine how healthy or polluted it is, they'll capture a bunch of frogs and they'll look at them for any defects, any mutations, things like that. And when they're pulling out frogs with 3 back legs, with 2 heads, or they find all sorts of strange things, that is an indicator to them that the ecosystem is not healthy. And as you look at nations, marriage is an indicator. Marriage is a symptom of the health of a nation. Marriage is an indicator of the health of a church. Marriage is the institution, how it is protected, how it is preached, how it is cared for, how it is invested in. Marriage points to God. The love between husband and wife points to the love between Jesus and his bride, the church. Marriage requires God to be successful. And if God is removed from a marriage, the marriage will die. Marriage as an institution, marriage as an individual marriage. So, you know how healthy a nation is? Look to the institution of marriage. And an individual marriage is healthy when the individuals within it are healthy. If you want your marriage to be healthy, then you need to be healthy in your relationship with God. You need to be healthy in your relationship with your spouse. You need to be healthy in your body. You need to be healthy. The more you invest and pursue your relationship with God, the more godly your marriage will be. When the individuals invest in their marriage, the stronger that relationship will be. My friends, it's so easy to complain about your marriage. But if you want a healthy, strong marriage, you have to invest in it. Pour yourself into it. Care for it. If your marriage is weak, then your relationship with the Lord is probably weak. Work on your relationship with God. It will drive you deeper into your marriage. The decline of marriage is an indicator. We see it here. The decline of parenting. I know I need to move quick here. A few more minutes. The concubine's father. I just want to look at that relationship here for a few moments. The relationship between the concubine's father and his daughter, and then as his son-in-law, is rather strange. And if you picked up on that in the big paragraph to begin, the first part of this story, the father-in-law didn't want his daughter to leave, did he? They stayed for 3 days. He got him to stay, and then he's like, hey, just stay one more day. Just come on, one more day. And the guy, the husband's like, the Levite's like, no, I need to go. He tricked him and manipulated him into staying one more night. Then the 5th day, he's like, okay, I have to leave. And the man stood up early in the morning. The father-in-law's persuading and just pressuring him, pushing him to stay again. And he kept him to stay through lunch and then into the afternoon. And finally, the man had enough. He said, I'm taking my family, and he's out of there. The father-in-law would not let go. Here's a few things I want to say to you all as parents. And this is so important for us. Because as America drifts further away from the Lord, parenting in America suffers. It's like people don't know how to parent anymore. And that was true in Israel as well. They struggled. Things get backward. But there's a calling in parenting. We as parents are called to certain things. And we're called, one, to cultivate our children into the godly adults that they are created to be, to cultivate them, to craft them, to mold them, not to control them. The father-in-law did not want his daughter to leave, and he was joyous to see his son-in-law there. Why? Because he's able to get him wrapped up into his home to control them. He didn't want them to go. And when you as a parent are so afraid of your children growing up, becoming independent, so afraid to release any amount of freedom to them, to be apart from them in any amount, my friends, that is control to the T. You are not called to control your children. You're called to cultivate them and send them out into the world for God. It's not control. That is not our calling. Parents, you are called to be a godly figure in your children's lives, not their closest friend, not their greatest friend. And this is where we get things flipped. And it's like today, so many people want to have kids so they have a friend. That is so unhealthy. Your child that God has given you, especially when they're small, they're not your friend. They are your children. And the relationship that you have with your child will change over time, but we front load so much of the discipline to train our children, to cultivate in them, to help them to grow to be the independent, godly adults that they ought to be. Not to be our best friends. And if you parent your children right, and if you discipline them well, you invest in that relationship well, then when they grow up, guess what happens? They become your friend. don't get it backward. When you front load the friendship, then they become adults who can't function on their own, who depend on you the rest of their lives, and then you're working the rest of your days to try to instill any amount of discipline you can in them, and it's too late. Discipline when they're young, friendship comes later. You are the godly, you represent God to your children, both husband and wife, man and woman. You represent God and his authority to your children. Parents are called to advocate for the marriage of their children, not meddle in their affairs. There's a big difference. And what you see so often is that a grown-up child gets married and they're having trouble in their marriage. They call on mom or dad, and mom and dad are in their ear and say, he should not treat you that way. She should just understand. And we begin to meddle, we begin to manipulate, and we begin to consistently side with our children because our children, God forbid they would ever do anything wrong, right? Our children are flawless, of course. It's always the spouse's fault. My friends, that is a recipe to destroy your children's marriage. You are an advocate for the marriage. You are an advocate for clarity and for truth. Well, honey, maybe he's upset at you because of this. Have you thought about this? Have you considered this? Now go figure it out. The best thing that this father could have done for his daughter when she showed up at his house is to find out what's wrong and then to say, honey, I'm sorry that's happening. You need to go back to your husband and figure it out. The very best thing that this father could have done for his daughter is to encourage her, to love on her, to hug her, and send her back to go fix her marriage with her husband. That's the very best thing he could have done. Parents, ultimately, we're called to lead with the future in mind rather than leading with our feelings in mind. When we parent to make ourselves feel good, then we're parenting wrong. When we parent, when we treat our children as if they're supposed to be affirming us, we're so backward. And you see this all the time, that parents are looking for affirmation from their own children. We can affirm and care for our kids. We raise them up. We tutor them. We craft them. We mold them. We discipline them. And guess what? Your kids are not going to like that all the time. If you are parenting for affirmation from your children, then you're backward. We need to raise children with the future that God has in mind for them, purposefully leading our children into godly independence rather than parenting to make ourselves feel good inside. So I'm telling you, to have a strong, independent adult child who loves God, who loves their family, that will make you feel better than anything else in this world. That's the goal, the future. Last thing, you see a decline in community. I told you guys to keep your finger on verse 15 because it's a key to what's happening in Israel. It says that no one took them into their home. This man and his concubine and servants went into the town square. And according to Israelite custom at this time, when travelers were passing through, they would go into the town square and they'd lay down. And they'd potentially just sleep right in the town square if there was no one around to receive them. But Israelite hospitality would dictate that if anyone saw someone laying in the town square, that it was incumbent on the citizens of that town to invite them into their homes and to keep them overnight. This was typical hospitality custom in the community in Israel at that time. But you see that's not happening, is it? Community's falling apart. Why? Because there's no leader. when there's no leader, when there's no one driving them closer to the Lord, then we see that there's no hospitality toward others. We see that there's no compassion for those in need, and we see that there's no respect for authority. People are literally doing whatever they want. Does that remind you of anything today? Community falling apart. Parenting backward. Marriages redefined. Leadership. So many red flags. Israel is suffering because they're drifting further and further away from God. My friends, our nation is struggling because it's drifting further and further away from God. It is our role as believers to, one, lead ourselves closer and closer to God. Two, to lead our families closer and closer to God. Three, to lead in the church, make sure that it's moving closer and closer to God. Four, to lead our communities. You see where I'm going here? Communities closer and closer to God, and to affect the nation and to drive our nation closer and closer to God. And my friends, it starts right here. It starts with you and it starts with me. We are the ones who can start dramatic change in Rolla, in Missouri, and in our nation. What happened in Israel does not have to happen here. It doesn't have to happen. So I want to challenge you to pray. I wanted to take time to pray at the end of service for our nation and stuff, but I know that I've talked through most of our time. But our work is really cut out for us. And so I want to pray for all of you. I'm going to pray a blessing over you. And maybe you find yourself wrestling with 1, 2, 3, all of these areas. Maybe you can relate here as you look at how you're parenting your children, as you look at how you're operating within your marriage, as you look at how you're showing hospitality and community to others, as you're leading other people. Maybe there's some areas in your own life that you realize, man, I need to draw close to the Lord. This needs to have some movement towards Christ here. As I pray over you, as I just pray a prayer of blessing over you, I just want to encourage you, if you can relate to a few of these areas in your own life, would you just take a moment, repent to the Lord, and ask Him to begin to lead you into righteousness? And as we draw closer to Him, I believe that we will see a great move of God in this place, in our state, and in our country. So would you pray with me? Lord, I'm so thankful for these people. And I'm thankful for your word and the really cautionary tale that this is. That what the nation of Israel is struggling with here is a direct result of their purposeful rebellion against you. And God, we can see the same signs in the world around us, and even here in Rolla, we can see so many of these things. But Lord, this group of people in this room right now, we're here because we want to honor you. We're here because we want to draw closer to you. And so I pray, Jesus, that your Holy Spirit will reveal to any one of us the areas of our life that are not aligning with your word. And that if we have some red flags present in our own lives right now, if we're parenting backward, if we're not protecting our marriage, Lord, if we're not advocating for the health of our marriage, Lord, if we're not leading well, whatever situation it may be, God, I just pray that you'd bring clarity and conviction into our hearts right now in this moment. And Jesus, I want to pray over these people, over these individuals. Jesus, I pray for your blessing over each one. God, I pray for your encouragement in every marriage that's represented. God, I pray for your strength for every parent that's in the room right now, whether they be parenting adult children or small children and everything in between. God, I pray that we would be godly parents, pointing our children to you, cultivating children in this life who honor you, who lead other people to you, who lead in the church, who are strong, capable and mature. God, I pray for every parent. I pray for every leader in this room. God, I pray for every household that we would exemplify godly hospitality and community. Jesus, I pray that we would see the needs in other people's lives, that we would address the needs, that, Lord, people would see you in every single one of us. So I pray for your blessing. I pray, God, for your provision, and I'm thankful today for your word. And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen. I love you guys. And I'm thankful for another Wednesday with you. Thank you for bearing with me in the long passages at the end of Judges. I appreciate your patience. I'll see you Friday night at 6:30. I look forward to it.